My amendment 3150 and ask to be reported by number.
The clerk will report.
Senator from Kentucky, Mr. Paul, proposes an amendment number 3150.
Can we have quiet in the chamber, please?
Please take your conversations off the floor.
Isn't it ironic that during today's long debate, we have not heard a word of the actual subject at hand, the budget? The budget presented by the Democrats has been entirely ignored by both parties. But if you read it, the Democrat budget before us is a blueprint for bankruptcy. The Democrat budget never balances and spends and borrows $15 trillion over 10 years. Already our national debt exceeds $28 trillion. We borrow $2 million a minute. Now, Republicans have largely been united in believing in a constitutional amendment to balance our budget in 5 years. In fact, many of the members have voted for that. What I have presented today is an alternative to the Democrat budget. This is a budget that balances in 5 years, and I recommend a yes vote.
The senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, Senator Paul's amendment would slash federal spending by trillions of dollars. It would mean massive cuts to Medicare, to Medicaid, to food stamps, to virtually every federal program that impacts working people and low-income people. It would cause massive suffering. I urge a no vote.
Question is on the amendment. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
Has anyone told you the price at the pump? Has anybody mentioned to you on the other side, what is the cost of this bill when we implement climate change reforms to you as a consumer? Senator Markey, who's a very passionate believer in climate change, said the Green New Deal is part of the DNA of this bill. Senator Sanders is an avowed socialist, one of the most honest people in this building. Senator Sanders' vision for the last 20 and 30 years is in this budget resolution. This budget resolution is a dream for those who want to socialize America. It's a nightmare for working people. How much has gas prices gone up in the last 6 months? $1. Here's what I think. If you implement the provisions of this budget resolution regarding climate change, you're declaring war on the internal combustion engine. You're going to shut down coal-fired plants in rural America. The question I have for my Democratic colleagues, how much will gas prices go up if this bill becomes reality? How much will your heating bill go up because you shut down supply? How has there been an increase of $1 at the pump? Policy matters. I dare say that if this bill ever is implemented, you're going to double gas prices. I hope you're listening out there, America. If they implement this radical transformation of our energy economy, you're going to have a dramatic increase of gas prices and heating prices. This is the worst thought-out idea I've ever seen. They're just throwing every liberal idea and hope it sticks to the wall, and their whole reason for being on the left is in this bill. There's a border-adjusted carbon tax proposal floating around out there. What does that mean to you? What the hell is a border-adjusted carbon tax? The best I can understand, it's going to be a tax on products coming into the country because the way the product was made is not sufficiently green enough. So they're going to charge for that product, put a tax on it at the border. Guess what? That's going to increase the cost of whatever good we're talking about. And where do you think that cost goes? It goes to you. This is the most inflationary idea I've ever seen. We've had 5.4% increase in inflation recently, wiping out all the gains in the economy. How could that be? You're spending money like drunken sailors, And if this bill ever becomes law, if it's ever implemented, and there's a border-adjusted carbon tax, it's going to be passed on to the consumer. If you're on a fixed income, this whole idea is a nightmare for you because your gas prices are going to go up, your heating bill is going to go up, and all the things that they're going to make for free will create an inflationary effect. The size of the government is going to increase dramatically. Interest rates will have to go up. So if you own a home, you drive a car, you breathe air, get ready for more taxes and more spending. All I can say is that I believe in climate change, and I'd like to have a rational approach to solving the problem. But this is not rational. This is partisan. And this $4.2 trillion bill, it's not $3.5, is going to lead to a wave of illegal immigration, the likes of which you've never seen before. A 262% increase in the last 6 months. If this bill, this idea ever becomes reality, you can double that. If this bill ever becomes reality, a $1 increase in gas prices are going to be the good old days. If they shut down all the coal-fired plants without any way to replace it other than a bunch of BS, good luck with a heating bill.
Hearing, I will say that my colleagues to the left have had a number of opportunities to ask questions of nominees before this committee that had nothing to do with the issues of this committee so many times that I can't even remember the number of times I've had to sit through banking hearing hour after hour listening to folks go on about things that have nothing to do with this committee. I would say that the comments that have been made by these noms, or at least a couple of them tweeting about the police, have everything to do with housing. The fact of the matter is housing is incredibly important, but safety in the place where you live is number one. And so when you have folks talking about defunding the police, you are actually making the housing issue and the desire for home ownership and for a good, safe place to live issue number one. I can't imagine something more important than safety in the place where you live. And having lived in some of the poorest parts of South Carolina, I can tell you firsthand that the one thing no one living in the communities where I grew up is asking for defunding the police. Not a single person. Not one. I'll say this, that you look at the most recent polls and surveys done, more than 80% of African Americans, I think it's 81%, has said very clearly they want the same level of policing or more policing, and that is consistent throughout every demographic in this country. And so while we can make this into a political issue, this is an issue that impacts real people in real places that feel insecure and unsure about where they live, and they want the same dignity and respect where they live. And so for us to take this as a simple political issue is frankly inconsistent with the reality faced by so many people who simply want to come home to a safe place. And while it's really easy to have a conversation not living in those communities about people in those communities, I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong, and not only do I think it's wrong, you can look at what's happening all across the country, and those folks who wanted to defund the police are now trying to find a way to refund the police. You think about Minneapolis with a 90% increase in violent crime and homicides. You think about the fact that they are now saying, wait a second, cutting the police may have been a really bad idea. Baltimore, there are almost 400 officers in a shortage. They have 392 positions to be filled, more than a dozen detective positions vacant. What's happening in Baltimore? The crime is up. And what is the city council saying? They're saying, well, last year we cut it by $22 million. This year, let's increase it by $28 million. Why? Because they understand that putting poor people And a place without security is immoral. It is wrong. And so for us to have this conversation as if it's just a conversation because we are sitting in one of the safest places in the United States is ridiculous, in my opinion. We should take serious our words. We can actually lead people to more violent activities because when leaders say something, people listen. And if you want to lead, take that responsibility seriously, very serious. Think about New York City just elected a new person who said, you're not defunding my police. We're going to actually add more policing. Whether it's New York City, Oakland, Baltimore, Minneapolis, Los Angeles, all are trying to reinstate millions, tens of millions of dollars in policing. And so when I hear Mr. Green tweet, no more money for police, I think about the kid I was living in the neighborhoods that I lived in where the police presence was necessary. It was essential. And so I don't think about this from the politics of left and right. I think about this as average American people who are vulnerable, who need help, who've worked hard, living paycheck to paycheck, and they want more policing. So, Mr. Green, would you like a chance to restate your position on defunding the police or give me better context for it? Because I got to say, it is an issue.
Senator Scott, I couldn't agree with you more, and I share your commitment to the health and safety of all residents in assisted housing, residents in the market. And I've worked in so many of the cities that you've mentioned to support improvements to communities, reinvestment in communities in ways that make them safer. I want to re-emphasize and make it abundantly clear. The words that you said, no more money for the police, were populated on my tweet when I shared an idea and I shared others' viewpoints. I regret if that is interpreted as my opinion. When I tweeted it at the time, I don't think it would have been interpreted that way. And I also don't think about this as the politics of left and right. As I said, one of my priorities, actually my number one priority, if I was fortunate enough to be confirmed, would be to harness the incredible talent at the Office of Policy Development and Research to better understand the needs and priorities of people and communities on the ground. So thank you so much for your commitment, and it's a commitment I share.
Mr. Chairman, I know I'm out of town. I'm going to finish with this statement right here. I'll tell you that I will debate anybody on funding the police at a proper level any day, anywhere, at any time, period. I'll say this as well. The reality of this is simply, as I work through police reform and I think about the issues and the comments made by so many people who have the advantage of sitting comfortably in a place, talking to others through their accounts, I think about those people who are literally desperately looking for leadership because for them, it's about life and death. It's not about politics. It's about life and death. And I take that seriously.
Thank you, Reverend Barber. Our next witness is Mark Robinson. Mr. Robinson is Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson of the state of North Carolina, and I recognize our guest member, Mr. Dan Bishop, Representative Dan Bishop, to introduce Lieutenant Governor Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark Keith Robinson burst onto the public scene April 3rd, 2018. In a public comment delivered to the City Council of Greensboro, North Carolina, on the subject of the reflex of government to diminish Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens in response to shootings that occur. The viral video of that event was well received, and his message was powerful on the subject matter he spoke to, but the real thunderclap was a point in the message when Mr. Robinson told the City Council, it's about time you start listening to the majority. Let me tell you who that is. I'm the majority, is what Mark Robinson said in words that galvanized the public. Over months that followed, he emerged as a national figure and demonstrated himself to be a thoughtful and learned student of history. and he brought a fresh perspective, and he revealed himself as a natural communicator. In the ensuing 2 years, the enthusiastic response to Mr. Robinson led him to run for, and he was elected as the first black lieutenant governor in North Carolina's history, fittingly as a Republican. No person in public life today better articulates the essence of our core freedoms and opportunities, or more effectively debunks the absurd wokeism that afflicts our political discourse than Mark Robinson. Lieutenant Governor Robinson epitomizes the promise of American liberty and opportunity. And I can think of no one better to cut through the hyper-partisan exaggerations we have heard in recent discourse over voter integrity, and to provide an honest assessment of the best ways to ensure that all Americans can realize the American dream regardless of their background than Lieutenant Governor Robinson. Lieutenant Governor, thank you for being here today, and I look forward to hearing your testimony.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Cohen and Ranking Member Johnson and all the members of the committee for allowing me to speak today. I'm honored to sit before this committee and testify before this body on such an important topic, a topic that hits close to home for me. You see, I'm the first black lieutenant governor of North Carolina, and I hail from Greensboro, home of the Woolworth sit-ins, an epicenter of the civil rights movement. I grew up poor as the ninth of 10 children in a home marred by alcoholism, but I had a mother who was a strong woman of faith, and she sustained us. She was also a woman who lived through the terribleness of Jim Crow and witnessed firsthand the sacrifices made by those to ensure that black voices would be heard in government. I know right now she is up in heaven smiling as she sees her son here sitting in this committee hearing. But today I'm not here to talk about myself. I'm here to talk about voter discrimination and election integrity. The subject of this hearing is the evolving landscape of voter discrimination, and it certainly has throughout our nation's history. Let me say that I am very proud of the history in this nation of my people. My people were put in the belly of ships, bound in chains, and endured the Middle Passage. My people were whipped, beaten, and sold as property during slavery. During Reconstruction and throughout Jim Crow, black people were intimidated, harassed, and even killed to keep them from having a voice in government. Symbols like chains, nooses, and burnt crosses are not just symbols of death. They are symbols of forced and coerced silence. The sacrifices of our ancestors, so I could have the opportunity to become the first black lieutenant governor of my state, to see a black man sit in the White House for 2 terms, and for millions of us to be leaders in business, athletics, government, and culture, add up to an incredible story of victory. But today, we hear Georgia law being compared to Jim Crow. The black voices are being silenced, and the black voices are being kept out. How? By bullets? By bombs? By nooses? No, by requiring a free ID to secure the vote. Let me say that again, by requiring a free ID to secure the vote. How absolutely preposterous. Am I to believe that black Americans who have overcome the atrocities of slavery, who were victorious in the civil rights movement, and now sit in the highest levels of this government cannot figure out how to get a free ID to secure their votes? That they need to be coddled by politicians because they don't think we can figure out how to make our voices heard. Are you kidding me? The notion that black people must be protected from a free ID to secure their votes is not just insane, it is insulting. Just a few days ago, and let me tell you something about this. This doesn't have anything to do with justice. This has everything to do with power. Just a few days ago, the vice president went to the very place that I mentioned, the Woolworth counter in Greensboro. But you know who wasn't there? You know who wasn't invited? My good friend Clarence Henderson, who is a civil rights icon. He sat at that counter and endured the suffering and pain to make sure that black voices were heard. And why was he left out? Because he's of a different political persuasion. You might ask why this is so, and I'll tell you plainly. The goal of some individuals in government is not to hear the voices of black Americans at all. It's to hear the voices that fit their narratives and ultimately help keep power with one group. And that's what this is all about. It's about power. Just look at H.R. 1. It's despicable. The entire thing is designed to keep one party in power and ensure they stay there indefinitely. And how do they plan to do that? By taking away the rights of states given by the Constitution to govern their own elections, to mandate a wish list, a partisan wish list that comes down from that federal government. Some of these items include using government dollars to fund campaigns in order to give an advantage to one party, mandating that felons are allowed to vote, including illegal immigrants on voter rolls, and of course, trying to ban states from having voter ID. The last thing I'll say is this. Many people know that I'm a strong proponent of the Second Amendment, and I always will be. I believe that the right to keep and bear arms should always be available to law-abiding citizens. But the first line of defense in maintaining the integrity of the Second Amendment is having an ID to show and requiring that ID when you purchase that firearm. In the same way, I believe that voter ID is our first line of defense for protecting the integrity of the right to vote. And that's what this should be about. It should be about integrity, not power.